Hi, and welcome back to the C# beginner tutorial series for the Stride game engine. In this tutorial, we learn how to get the entity that a script is attached to in our scene. We also learn how to retrieve the parent, the names of the entities, and how to print the names of those entities onto the screen. For this tutorial, I've loaded in the Getting the Entity subscene. As you can see, I have two child entities here inside this scene. One is called I am the parent, which is this left object here, and that has a child, which is this smaller entity to the right. What we're going to do is we're going to write a little script, and we're going to attach that to this child entity. We're going to fetch the name of that child and display its name underneath. Then we're going to look for a parent object, which in this case exists, and we're then going to display that name on the screen as well. Let's hop on over to Visual Studio. I've prepared a little script that is called Getting the Entity Demo. Let's first declare two variables that are going to store the name of the current entity that this script is attached to and the parent entity. By default, we're going to say string empty. Then we're going to create a second variable called parent name. Let's use the proper wording there. And now let's see how we can get the entity that this script is going to be attached to. Well, we can use the entity property for that. So first we're going to say name is followed by entity, followed by a dot, and followed by the name property. So every sync script, as well as an async script, has this entity property available in the script, which means that we can always address it, and it contains a lot of useful methods as well as properties like this name. Now let's retrieve the parent entity and store it in a separate variable. Again, we can say entity, and this time we use the getParent method. Let's pop up the IntelliSense with Ctrl-Shift-Space, and then we can see what this method does. It returns the parent of this entity, but it can also return null if there is no parent. So in our case, we know that there is a parent. However, it's very common practice, or it's a good practice, to always check if an entity exists, yes or not. So what we're going to do is if parent is not null, followed by the accolades, then we're going to say parent name is parent.name. Now that we've retrieved the names, we can print them to the screen. We can do this by using debugText.print, and then we have to provide some parameters here. So let's have a look at them. There are two options of parameters here, and the first one is the one that we're going to use. The first parameter is the message, which in our case, at first, is the parent name, because that was the object on the left. Next up is the position, or the coordinates that we're going to draw the text on. This is an integer 2. And as you can see, it resides in the stride.core.mathematics namespace. So what we can do is we can type new int 2. And once we do this, if we would press enter now, let's do that, then it will fill in that entire namespace into our line. And you don't always want that, because we're going to repeat this entire debug text print line. We're going to repeat that. So instead of using that entire namespace over there, I can just use the shortcut key Ctrl-, and now the IntelliSense pops up a little suggestion saying using stride.core.mathematics, which we're going to do. And if we scroll up to our file, we see that it's now using stride.core.mathematics. And you can see that the integer 2 data type is now included into our script. Let's open the parentheses for this integer 2 and provide an x and a y value. Now I know that this value needs to be drawn at 580, 580. And now let's draw the second name, or the name of our actual child, of our actual entity that we are attached to the screen. Now that we've done so, we can build our script directly in the editor using Ctrl-Shift-B. And if we go back to Stride, it will tell us that some code has been modified, assemblies have been modified, and that we want to reload. In my case, I'm going to say don't ask this again. If we would run our scene right now, nothing would happen because we haven't attached our script to this child entity just yet. So make sure you've selected the I am the child object in your scene, click on the add component and start typing the name of the component. Now that we've attached it, press Ctrl S to save and click on the run button. This, in case the code hasn't been built yet, will start the building process and then it will start the game. Now that the game has loaded, let's select the first level, getting the entity. And as you can see now, the name, I am the parent, is displayed underneath the parent object, and I am the child is displayed beneath the child object. Now, if we would have been running this game in release mode instead of debug mode, this text would not have been printed to the screen. That means that if we would set this option here in Visual Studio to release, we would not see this text. You can still build the game, but it just wouldn't be visible. In the next tutorial, we'll learn how to retrieve children from the current entity. And one last time, I want to point out that all the tutorials that we're going through, you can find these online at doc.stride3d.net. You can go to the documentation, then to the tutorials, and here you can find, in this case, the C# beginners course. You can select all the tutorials individually. You can read about it in a brief description, and then you can find the entire code. This is the same code as the actual C# template that you can select from the Stride game launcher. This code contains a lot of comments to help you along with the coding process, and it provides you with some additional information on how you can achieve certain things. For instance, how to use less lines of code to achieve the exact same thing. In all the following tutorials, we will not be going back to this documentation, so be sure to check it out if you're running into any issues. I hope you learned something in this tutorial, and I'll see you around in the next tutorial.